The crystalline spires of Nova Celestia gleamed under the triple suns of Astrius Prime as Naira stood before her reflection, adjusting her ceremonial robes. Her iridescent scales shimmered with anxiety as she prepared to meet the human ambassador. The Council's decision to forge an alliance with Earth still baffled her. "These humans," she muttered, "barely a century into space travel and they think they're ready for interstellar diplomacy." Her assistant, Ven, chirped softly from the doorway. "The reports suggest they're more capable than we assumed, High Diplomat Naira. Their adaptability is remarkable." Naira's antenna twitched with skepticism. She'd studied the reports thoroughly. Humans were resourceful, yes, but also unpredictable, emotional, and prone to violence. And now she was expected to work closely with one of them. The thought made her inner membranes flutter uncomfortably. The transport vessel carrying the human ambassador would dock within the hour. Naira had reviewed his file repeatedly. Dominic Wells, Earth Diplomatic Corps, specialized in xenocultural relations. His credentials were impressive for a species so young, but that did little to ease her concerns. As she made her way to the docking bay, accompanied by her honor guard, Naira rehearsed the formal greetings in her mind. The station's corridors hummed with nervous energy. She wasn't the only one apprehensive about this meeting. The docking bay doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the sleek Earth vessel. Naira straightened her posture, channeling generations of diplomatic training. The airlock cycled, and she held her breath. Ambassador Dominic Wells stepped through, and Naira's first thought was how ordinary he appeared. She'd expected something more imposing. Instead, she faced a man of average height with warm brown skin and alert dark eyes. He wore the formal black and silver uniform of the Earth Diplomatic Corps with an ease that suggested comfort rather than stiffness. "High Diplomat Naira," he said in perfect celestial standard, executing a flawless traditional greeting bow. "I bring peaceful intentions and hopes for mutual prosperity." Naira blinked all four of her eyes in succession, surprised by his precise pronunciation. "Ambassador Wells," she responded, returning the gesture. "Nova Celestia welcomes you." As they walked to the diplomatic quarters, Naira found herself studying the human's movements. He matched her pace perfectly, maintaining the exact proper distance according to Celestian protocol. Either he'd studied extensively, or humans were more observant than she'd given them credit for. "I hope my presence doesn't cause undue discomfort," Dominic said softly, catching her off guard. "I understand this arrangement is unprecedented." Naira's scales flickered with embarrassment at being so transparent. "Your preparation is commendable, Ambassador. Though I admit to some uncertainty about this alliance." Dominic smiled, and Naira was struck by how the expression transformed his features. "Uncertainty is natural when bridging such vast differences. Perhaps we could start with what we share rather than what divides us." The simple wisdom in his words caught her off guard. Before she could respond, alarms blared through the station. Red emergency lights pulsed along the corridors. "Station breach in Sector 7, the automated system announced. Containment failure imminent." Without hesitation, Dominic turned to her. "Your environmental needs, what are they?" "I require moisture and can't tolerate extreme heat," Naira replied automatically, surprised by his practical question. "Right." He stripped off his uniform jacket. "This is lined with smart fabric that maintains optimal humidity. Please, take it. Sector 7 is near the thermal regulators, it'll be hot." Naira stared at the offered garment, touched by his immediate concern for her well-being. As she slipped it on, his scent enveloped her, not unpleasant, just different. Human. Together they raced toward the crisis, and Naira realized her earlier prejudices were already beginning to crack. Perhaps there was more to humans, to this human, than she'd assumed. She just hoped they'd have time to explore those possibilities after dealing with whatever disaster awaited them in Sector 7. The thermal regulators in Sector 7 had gone critical, turning the maintenance tunnels into a maze of scalding steam and failing equipment. Dominic watched with admiration as Naira navigated the emergency with practiced efficiency, her scales shifting colors to reflect the heat signatures around them. The primary coolant system is beyond that bulkhead, she explained, antenna twitching as she analyzed the situation. But the override controls are damaged. Dominic studied the sealed door, his mind racing. The Earth core trains us for similar situations. If you can guide me through your system's architecture, I might have an alternative solution. Naira hesitated, centuries of ingrained caution warring with immediate necessity. Protocol strictly forbade sharing technical knowledge with less advanced species. But as another wave of heat rolled through the corridor, she made her decision. The system uses crystalline matrices for power distribution, she began, watching as Dominic immediately pulled tools from his utility belt and began working on the control panel. His hands moved with surprising delicacy for a species she'd considered primitive, carefully bridging connections and rerouting power flows. When he sliced his palm on a sharp edge, he barely flinched, continuing his work even as crimson blood dripped onto the floor. Almost. He muttered, and suddenly the door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Cool air rushed out, bringing blessed relief. Together they stabilized the regulators, working in seamless coordination that surprised them both. As the emergency klaxons finally fell silent, Naira found herself studying the human with new interest. "You're injured," she said, gesturing to his bleeding hand. Dominic shrugged. "Worth it to prevent a station-wide disaster." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Though I wouldn't object to learning about your medical technologies in exchange." The gentle humor in his voice made her own lips curve upward, an unusual sensation. "I believe that could be arranged, Ambassador. Though I must admit, your actions today have challenged certain assumptions I held about humans." "That's a diplomatic way of saying you thought we were primitive brutes," Dominic replied, no judgment in his tone. "It's all right. I've heard the whispers since I arrived. But perhaps we could use this as an opportunity to learn more about each other. Over a meal, perhaps." The invitation startled her. Sharing food was an intimate activity in Celestian culture, usually reserved for family units. But then, hadn't he already shown more trustworthiness than she'd expected? "I would like that," she found herself saying. "Though I should warn you, our dietary requirements are quite different." "Different doesn't mean incompatible," Dominic said softly, and Naira felt her scales warm at the double meaning in his words. That evening, in her private quarters, they shared their first meal together. Dominic approached the strange Celestian delicacies with genuine curiosity, asking thoughtful questions about their preparation and cultural significance. In turn, he shared stories of Earth's diverse cuisines, painting pictures of spices and flavors that made her antenna quiver with interest. As they talked, barriers began to crumble. Naira found herself fascinated by the complexity of human emotions, the way Dominic could shift from professional diplomat to passionate storyteller to analytical problem solver. He was unlike any being she'd encountered in her centuries of diplomatic service. "Your species adapts so quickly," she mused. "In just a few generations, you've gone from planetary warfare to interstellar diplomacy." "We had good motivation," Dominic replied. "The stars called to us. And when we realized we weren't alone in the universe, we knew we had to evolve, or risk being left behind." The honesty in his words touched something deep within her. Before she could respond, however, her communication panel chimed with an urgent message from the council. The words that scrolled across her screen made her scales pale to an ashen gray. Dominic noticed her distress immediately. "What's wrong?" Naira looked at him, conflict evident in all four of her eyes. "The Council has received reports of unauthorized weapons being smuggled through our space. They believe Earth may be involved." The accusation hung heavy between them, threatening to destroy their newfound understanding. But to her surprise, Dominic's expression showed concern rather than defensiveness. "Then we'll investigate together," he said firmly. "Whatever the truth is, we'll face it. I won't let fear and suspicion destroy what we're building here. His words warmed her, even as worry gnawed at her core. Something deeper was brewing, and she feared their budding relationship would be tested in ways neither of them could imagine. The weapons investigation led Naira and Dominic through the shadowy underbelly of Nova Celestia. Station records showed suspicious cargo movements through restricted sectors, but something about the patterns felt wrong to Dominic's trained eye. These manifests, he said, studying the holographic displays in Naira's office. The routing is too obvious. No real smuggler would leave such a clear trail. Naira's scales shifted to a thoughtful purple. You think we're being led somewhere? A trap, or a distraction? Dominic's fingers traced the cargo routes. Look here, every shipment passes through Sector 12, but that's not the most efficient path. Before Naira could respond, her door chimed. Council member Thrix entered, his ceremonial robes rustling. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Dominic studying secure station data. High Diplomat, this investigation is now under council jurisdiction, Thrix announced. The humans' involvement is no longer required. Naira felt her scales bristle. With respect, council member, Ambassador Wells has provided valuable insights. That will be all, Thrix cut her off. The council has evidence confirming Earth's involvement. We're severing diplomatic relations immediately. Dominic stood slowly, his expression carefully neutral. May I see this evidence? You dare question the council's authority? Thrix's voice dripped with disdain. But Dominic's attention had shifted to something behind Thrix. Through the office window, he spotted movement in the supposedly empty corridor, armed figures in stealth suits. Without warning, Dominic tackled Naira to the ground as plasma fire shattered the window. Thrix dove for cover, his robes smoking. Still trust your council's evidence? Dominic asked Naira as they crawled behind her desk. Those aren't Earth weapons, she replied, her military training kicking in as she analyzed the attack pattern. The plasma signature is wrong. More shots peppered the office. Dominic pulled a small device from his boot, a personal shield generator. He slapped it onto Naira's arm. What about you? She protested. I'll manage. He grinned. We humans are surprisingly resilient. They fought their way out of the office, Naira's shield deflecting enemy fire while Dominic demonstrated impressive hand-to-hand combat skills against their attackers. They made it to a maintenance shaft, Thrix following reluctantly. Those were Drachnid mercenaries, Naira said once they were safe. Someone wanted to make this look like an Earth attack. But why? Dominic wondered. Who benefits from destroying the Alliance? Thrix's expression had grown increasingly uncomfortable. There are factions within the Council who believe alliance with primitive species will weaken us. Primitive? Dominic raised an eyebrow. Primitive enough to see through your staged weapons evidence. The weapons shipments, Naira realized. They were never meant to be found. They were just positioning mercenaries throughout the station. For a coup, Dominic finished. Eliminate the pro-alliance council members and blame Earth in one stroke. Thrix slumped against the wall. I was supposed to keep you occupied with the investigation while they prepared. I never thought they'd resort to violence. Well, Dominic said, checking his borrowed weapons charge, shall we go prevent a coup? Naira found herself smiling despite the danger. Together? I can't think of anyone I'd rather have watching my back. His words carried deeper meaning that made her scales flush warm colors. They had a station to save, conspirators to expose, and an alliance to preserve. But in that moment, Naira realized something had shifted between them, something that transcended politics and species differences. She just hoped they'd live long enough to explore what that meant. The maintenance tunnels of Nova Celestia echoed with distant weapons fire as Naira, Dominic, and the repentant council member Thrix made their way toward the central chamber. Through Thrix's security access, they'd learned the conspirators' plan to strike during the next council session. 7 minutes until the session begins, Naira whispered, her scales shifting to stealth patterns that blended with the station's walls. Security systems are compromised. Then we do this the human way, Dominic replied, checking his borrowed weapon. Improvise. They encountered their first resistance at a security checkpoint. 2 Drachnid mercenaries stood guard, their augmented armor gleaming. Before Naira could form a plan, Dominic had already moved. He slid beneath their line of fire, using his smaller size to his advantage, and disabled both guards with precise strikes to vulnerable joint sections. How did you know their armor's weakness? Thrix asked, amazed. I pay attention, Dominic said simply, but his eyes met Naira's. During their shared meals, she'd mentioned Drachnid armor design while discussing military history. He'd been listening, learning, preparing, even then. They reached the council chamber's auxiliary entrance as the session began. Through the ventilation grating, they could see council leader Vax addressing the assembly. Armed figures lurked in the shadows, waiting to strike. 37 hostiles, Naira counted, her enhanced vision scanning the room. And Vax is wearing personal shields. He's part of it. We need a distraction, Thrix said. Something to throw off their timing. Dominic's expression turned grim. The environmental controls. If we overload them like in Sector 7-. No, Naira cut him off. The heat would affect me more than them. You'd be fighting alone. Then I'll fight alone. The fierce determination in his voice made her scales ripple with emotion. You'll die. Maybe. He smiled that infuriating human smile. But I'll die protecting something worth believing in. Sometimes the best diplomacy requires sacrifice. Before she could stop him, Dominic had slipped away toward the control panel. Naira felt her hearts clench with fear, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. The next few minutes were chaos. As Dominic overloaded the environmental systems, superheated steam filled the chamber. The mercenaries' targeting systems faltered in the heat haze. Naira, protected by Dominic's shield generator, led the loyal council members to safety while Thrix transmitted evidence of the conspiracy to station security. Through it all, she caught glimpses of Dominic moving through the steam like a ghost, disabling mercenaries with ruthless efficiency. But the heat was taking its toll. His movements grew slower, his breathing labored. When Vax pulled out a quantum destabilizer, an illegal weapon that could tear apart matter at the molecular level, Naira's heart stopped. She saw Dominic notice the weapon, saw him realize he couldn't reach Vax in time. Their eyes met across the chaos. In that moment, every barrier between them, species, culture, prejudice, evaporated like steam. Without hesitation, Naira ripped off the shield generator and threw it to him. Dominic caught it, activated it, and lunged at Vax just as the destabilizer fired. The shield held, barely, giving Dominic the seconds he needed to disarm the council leader. When station security finally arrived, they found an unusual scene, a human and a Celestian standing together, supporting each other as they watched the conspirators being led away. You could have died, Naira said softly, her scales still flickering with anxiety. You too, Dominic replied, his voice hoarse from the heat. Giving up your shield was quite the diplomatic gesture. Perhaps, she said, her antenna brushing his shoulder, it was more than diplomacy. The look they shared held promises neither of them were ready to voice. But as medical teams arrived and the crisis subsided, both knew their relationship, and the alliance between their peoples, had been forged stronger than ever in the crucible of trust and sacrifice. 3 months after the failed coup, Nova Celestia sparkled with celebration lights. The formal signing of the Earth-Celestian alliance drew dignitaries from across known space. But in a quiet garden chamber, away from the ceremonies, Dominic found Naira watching the station's artificial sunrise. The Council's rehabilitation program for the conspirators is proceeding well, she said as he approached. Thrix's testimony was instrumental in identifying all involved parties. And the weapons smuggling network? Dismantled. Her scales rippled with satisfaction. Though I suspect we'll be dealing with anti-alliance sentiment for some time. Dominic moved closer, noting how her scales shifted to warm colors at his proximity. Change takes time. But look how far we've come already. Indeed, the station had transformed. Humans and Celestians worked side by side, sharing knowledge and culture. The medical exchange program had already produced promising results, combining Earth's innovative approaches with Celestian biotechnology. The Council has offered me a new position, Naira said suddenly. Permanent ambassador to Earth. Dominic's heart raced. And? I'm considering it. She turned to face him, all four eyes meeting his gaze. Though there are complications. Such as? Interspecies relationships are unprecedented. Many would oppose it. Many already oppose everything we've done, Dominic pointed out. That hasn't stopped us before. Her antenna brushed his cheek, sending tingles through both of them. True. And our differences make us stronger together. He took her hand, marveling at how natural it felt now. We've proven that repeatedly. A small crowd had gathered at the garden's entrance, council members, Earth diplomats, station crew. Some watched with approval, others with confusion or concern. But neither Dominic nor Naira paid them any attention. The human way or the Celestian way, she asked, a smile in her voice. Both, Dominic replied. We'll make our own way. Their kiss sent ripples through station gossip networks and diplomatic channels alike. It wasn't just a union of two people, but a symbol of what their peoples could achieve together. Later, during the alliance signing ceremony, Naira stood proud in her new role as ambassador to Earth. Dominic watched from the Earth delegation, his diplomatic uniform now bearing both Earth and Celestian insignias. Let this alliance mark not just cooperation between our peoples, Naira addressed the assembly, but the beginning of true understanding. Our differences need not divide us. They can inspire us to reach beyond what either of us could achieve alone. As applause filled the chamber, Dominic caught her eye. They'd faced prejudice, conspiracy, and near death together. They'd broken barriers and built bridges. But their greatest adventure, showing the galaxy that love truly knew no bounds, was just beginning. The artificial sun of Nova Celestia set on the old era of separation and rose on a new age of unity. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, other species watched and wondered if they too could find such courage to reach across the stars and connect. For Naira and Dominic, it was simple, home wasn't a planet or a station anymore. Home was wherever they faced the future together, two hearts beating in harmony despite all odds, proving that the greatest power in the universe wasn't technology or politics, but the ability to see beyond differences and love without boundaries.